Good evening, everybody. My name is Wayne Ranney, and I serve on the board of directors for the Grand Canyon Historical Society. And we welcome you to tonight's virtual outing. The Grand Canyon Historical Society, our mission is to celebrate and promote the study and preservation of the Grand Canyon region's cultural and natural history for the education and enjoyment of its members and the public. And just last year in 2024, we celebrated 40 years of existence when the society was started by some pioneer members of Grand Canyon Village. We encourage you to become a member. Our dues are only $35 a year. We are an all-volunteer organization, and we're hopeful that many of you can join us so that we can continue to expand all of our activities like these virtual outings and in-person outings and our tri-annual history symposiums. If you do become a member, you'll get 4 issues in the calendar year of the Old Pioneer magazine, which has a lot of history articles about the Grand Canyon and the Grand Canyon region. So we do these virtual outings. We conduct tours at the South and North Rim, and you can find it on our website. Our website is very easy, grandcanyonhistory.org.
Tonight, we are really honored to have Margaret Hangan and Emily Dale with us. Margaret is the Heritage Program Manager for the Kaibab National Forest. She earned her bachelor's degree from Pitzer College, which is part of the Claremont Colleges in Los Angeles. She received her master's from California State University in Bakersfield. Margaret's a career archaeologist with experience in the private sector. She worked for the Bureau of Land Management and the U.S. Forest Service at the Cleveland National Forest in San Diego. Dr. Emily Dale is a historical archaeologist with a focus on 19th and 20th century American West. She teaches at Northern Arizona University here in Flagstaff and received her PhD from the University of Nevada in Reno. And without further ado, I introduce to you Margaret Hangan and Emily Dale.
So this project is born out of a joint collaborative archaeology project between myself in the anthropology department at Northern Arizona University and the Kaibab National Forest, with Margaret being my sort of point of contact for that. And it basically started, I wanted to run a historical archaeology field school, and so I talked to Margaret and said, what do you got? And she picked a site that needed some work and further investigation. And that's where we are. And we started this 2 years ago, and hopefully one day we'll actually get to go out on the field because our fieldwork has been canceled for the past 2 years because of the ongoing pandemic. So hopefully this summer we'll be able to go out. Anything else, Margaret? I'll just sort of pause at the end of each slide if you have anything to add.
No, but I might add that actually, Neil Weintraub was our district archaeologist. Neil Weintraub, which many of you are probably quite familiar with, was also part of this. We actually looked at quite a few sites. We definitely knew that we wanted her to focus in on the logging and railroad history. And so, but we focused in on Apex because it had it was occupied for so long and it had such a nice wide history. Plus, Al Richmond, of course, had done a lot of work on it, and there was still a lot of information available that we thought the field school could bring forth. So so that's why I think we focused in on Apex as an opportunity.
All right, so we'll just start with a little bit of the historical background to situate. Seems like a lot of you haven't heard of Apex, so let's see where it goes. So Apex is located along the Grand Canyon Railway, which many of you are probably familiar with, which operated by the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe starting in 1901 and lasted until 1968. By around 1928, it became quite apparent that automobile transportation was going to overtake the railway, and so it became used less and less. But it was also an industrial railway in the sense that you have sites like Apex, which was a logging siting. You have the mines at places like Anita, all the cattle and sheep ranching in the area that made it not just a sort of tourist railway, but also a supply railway and a railway that brought goods like timber, wood, cattle back into Williams. So it had a lot of economic purposes as well. But by 1968, it was apparent that it just wasn't keeping up with the economic costs, and so it shut down. And by 1974, they had pulled up all the ties and things like that. Although obviously they have since rebuilt it in the original railroad grade. So that's where the current Grand Canyon Railway sits. Apex itself was named not because it's at the highest elevation along the Grand Canyon Railway, but because it's at the top of the steepest grade. And then it was renamed Imblo after Sam Imblo, one of the engineers, passed away, or railwayman passed away in the 2000s. Anything? Oh, it's at marker 52 of 64 miles. I may have that backwards. It might be 54 of 62 miles. Anyway, so it's right outside of Tucson, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, but as the crow flies, it's about 10 miles south of Tucson and about 3 miles to the west of Highway 64.
Yeah, so not too far off the beaten track, but far enough away that, you know, it still has some integrity left to it. But you can see it on the little map here. Margaret, I'll let you take this slide about the importance of the lumber industry in northern Arizona.
Yeah, so as many of you guys know, because you know the history of the area, lumber became a major industry here when the railroad, the Atlantic and Pacific Railroad arrived to the area in 1881. That made the exploitation of not only did the railroad itself become a partner in the lumber industry, but that gave an opportunity for the exploitation, the systematic exploitation of the lumber, the largest contiguous ponderosa pine forest in the nation. So it made it economically feasible to actually come and exploit this landscape. So Tucson, the first logging was actually on this, what we call the south zone of the Kaibab. So it was really along the Challenger district, which is out near Parks, and then on into the bigger part of the Williams district, which is that part of the forest that's south or around the I-40 and south towards Prescott. For those who are not familiar with the Williams, the Kaibab's district system. And the biggest lumber operator, although there were others, was the Saginaw Manistee, who came in the late 1800s and set up a large mill and later a mill and box company, which they operated out of Williams, Arizona. And to exploit the logging, they actually, after when the industry or when technology caught up with it, they were able to put in these long systems of railroad grades, which they used to actually get in and out of the forest. And so, these railroad grades were full gauge railroads. These are not narrow gauge as you often see mining operations. These are the full gauge railroad systems that they were putting and using throughout not only the Kaibab but the Coconino as well, and the Apache Sitgreaves. Railroad was used, different company, but this was a common technology for logging at that time. So by the 1920s, much of the southern half of the forest had already been fairly logged out, and most of the economically feasible material had probably pretty much been taken. So that's when they started looking at the North Kaibab, the Tucson district, which is the reason why the Tucson district was logged so late in the period. So the Saginaw Manistee Company started, as I said, in the late 1890s, and they actually left Flagstaff, Williams by the early 1950s, in which they actually moved to Flagstaff. So the time frames that they're up on Tucson is really from the 1920s to the 1930s, I believe. And what makes, and I think what made that feasible was the fact that the Grand Canyon Railroad was there, had been in place since, was actually put in place to access and Anita Mine area, which was a large copper mine in the late 1800s, and then they extended it by 1901 to the Grand Canyon. And that made it feasible for them And they used that as a jumping off point to put in a logging system on the Tusayan district, which Apex became literally the center point for that transition off the Grand Canyon Railroad onto the logging system in the Tusayan district. And then that's what they were able to use and build on to exploit the wood on the Tusayan district. So it was one of the last periods of intensive logging, I believe, that Saginaw Manistee did before they left the area and went towards to Flagstaff in the 50s. Did I hit it?
Yeah. So just to add on to that, I mean, I agree with Margaret that part of the reason both the railway and the lumber company worked so well is because they worked together. The AT&SF provided sidings, wise, and in exchange, the Saginaw Manistee Lumber Company produced nearly 5,000 ties to help complete and maintain the railway. They also then supported the local mines by providing, timbers, and a lot of the construction boom at the Grand Canyon Village came from the lumber that was produced by the Saginaw Manistee Lumber Company out of Apex. And their logging spurs, I mean, you can see they extend super far. There's about 26, they extend at least 26 miles towards the rim of the Grand Canyon. And part of what we're going to be doing this summer is surveying those. But Pat Stein has a fantastic context for lumber industry because it is such a unique part of northern Arizona. Some of the lumber was actually even sent down to like Phoenix and Tucson because they just didn't have those supplies up here the same way that they did in northern Arizona. So the lumber of the Kaibab ended up in a lot of different places because of this successful partnership between these two industries that realized that they needed each other in order to be successful. All right, next slide.
So
oh, it sounded like you wanted to add something.
No, go for it.
All right, so that brings us to Apex. What is Apex's sort of role in this amalgamation of cooperation? So Apex was founded in 1928 by the Saginaw and Manistee Lumber Company to serve as the headquarters, the base of operations for this extensive logging operation and maze of logging spurs. By 1936, they had run out their contract with the Kaibab National Forest on the Kaibab land, and so they shut down operations. And as Margaret pointed out, moved elsewhere in looking for timber stands to lease and operate. Sorry, my cat is yelling at me. All told, there are around 14 houses, both individual family housing and sort of company, what's the word I'm searching for?
Company stores.
Well, company labor housing. What is that?
Yeah.
I forget what the word is. They also had a schoolhouse, a company store. There were also when they also had like commissary cars and box cars and housing cars that would go out on the logging spurs when the workers were out there, but then they would come back into town when the workers were there. Industry-wise, oil tanks, water tanks, sheds, maintenance buildings, and that's not even getting into what is at Apex. And I think Al is here now. So thank you, Al, for this fantastic map that I stole out of your book. But you can see sort of this arrangement that the siding comes straight through the middle of the town. And so by Al's estimation, you have 7 houses or so on one side and 7 houses in the school on the other side of the railroad track. So it is sort of a town divided, but it's not like the railway where there's constantly trains going through. But there, tons of trains, bring the lumber back in from the logging spurs, taking it back out towards Apex, the siding over here. Oh, milepost 52. It was 52, I was right. So fairly sizable town and fairly long-lived for one of these company towns. So we do have quite a lot of historical information as well as archaeological information that we'll talk about in just a second. Anything else, Margaret, to add on to the history of Apex?
No, only I think the only thing I would say, and I think you alluded to it too, and I'm sure Al would agree with this, is that the other aspect, again, of what made Apex unique was that, because yes, you have that transition between Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe and this operation, but also that, most of the housing associated with the logging was temporary. They put houses and structures on the back of the railroad, drove them out, set up a camp. It was specific to that operation. And the people who were a part of that camp were specific to that operation. It was lean and mean and do the work. Apex actually had a mix of families and other people. They were more around the management more so than the worker bees, so to speak. So that's another part of what makes Apex really unique in the overall system of this logging operation.
Yeah, it's simultaneously like so permanent. We're going to be here as long as the contract and lease is going, but also we need to be able to pack up. So this sort of oxymoronic relationship to the landscape and the railroad. So who are these workers? Much like many companies, they had sort of a loyal employee base. Both the Saginaw and Manistee lumber companies, when they were separate entities, were based out of the Midwest, and then they joined forces and became sort of a giant Midwest conglomerate in Arizona. And so they had their own dedicated employees back in parts of like Minnesota, which historically were largely Scandinavian workers. And so they brought a lot of originally Swedish workers with them, kind of like what we see in Arizona with the McNary, right? Lumber company bringing their largely African-American employees out of Louisiana, that we know these people can do the job, so we'll bring them with us. And that in turn attracted more Swedish, Norwegian, and Finnish workers. So the town itself was largely Scandinavian. At their mill plant, which Margaret mentioned in Williams, most of those workers were Mexican or Native American. So you do have this sort of segregated workforce of who is allowed to do which kinds of jobs. The Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe had a similar but opposite approach, where most of their workers on the railway were Mexican and Native, or the public facing ones were white, while those who did most of the maintenance and worked at the siding were Mexican and Native American. So we do have this interplay of sort of differentiated, not in my backyard relationships to the ethnicity of their workers. And so we are going to do a little bit of investigation into, can we see elements of these, Scandinavian lives and their relationship to the workers on the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe. And I also stole this picture from Al Richmond's book as well, because he did such a good job of diving through the historical records. So you can see these Apex lumberjacks working on the trees here. Margaret?
What next?
Okay.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Like Margaret mentioned, this is a labor town, but it's not what we see in terms of these are just laborers. Most laborers would have been out on the spur, so we're expecting a lot more sort of work stuff further away from town. While in town, we have evidence of families. The superintendent had the nicest house. It had 2 bedrooms. Family housing had 1 bedroom, and then of course there were the sort of workers' quarters, bunk beds, things like that. But as Margaret mentioned, those were all rail cars that were packed up and taken away. So we do have single men and families there, which in turn means children. Between 1929 and 1936, 3 different school teachers presided over the Apex school. Along with Anita at the mine, it was one of 2 unsegregated schools in northern Arizona, just 40 miles away. Down at Apex, or down at Williams, they had separate schools for separate, Mexican, Native American, white children.
And let me correct you there. They actually taught the Mexican children downstairs and the white children upstairs. So that's how they didn't have a separate school. They just taught them, they segregated, and they were segregated in elementary school. By high school, by law, they were no longer segregated. But absolutely, she's right. And when you had a small population of students, They weren't required to segregate.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Mhm.
But school population was pretty small, and most 15 students. But again, we see that combination of the Scandinavian workers' children and likely the Mexican and Native American workers who lived at the siding going to school together. The school is surprisingly, and I'm not quite sure why, maybe it was just such a big, more sizable building. It's the only one that actually has any foundations left here. So here's a picture of Rose Wilson and her class of students. And this is, I took this in May. You can see the foundations here, but it's like the most amount of architecture that we have at the site still. Anything else, Margaret?
Nope.
So wide variety, men, women, children, all living and working at the site. Oh, yeah, so as Margaret mentioned, in 1936, they ran out their lease, the school closed, everything was flat packed, put back on rail cars and sent back out on the railway to go to the next camp. And so there's very few bits of architecture left. Everything was sort of made to ship in and made to ship out. And so we have building foundations. And so we know where some of the buildings are, but no actual sizable buildings or anything are left. All right, so how are we going about researching this? One of the big components is going to be a field school. So through Northern Arizona University, I'm going to be running an archaeological field school. Again, it's been canceled the past 2 years, so I'm really hoping 2022 is our summer to get going on this thing. But we're envisioning a multi-year project. A lot of survey. There's not a ton of soil up there, and everything's pretty much just sort of sitting on the surface, as I'll show you with some pictures later. So we've got a lot of trash scatters associated with where buildings and houses were. We're going to do some survey walking along the logging spurs to see if we can find evidence of where they may have stopped and worked, how big and how long are these logging spurs, other kinds of features we may find. We think we know where some of the privies are, the outhouses, including the schoolhouse privies. So we will be doing some limited excavations there to see if we can find evidence of different kinds of trash. And, oh, yes. Yeah, going back, we have a question. Mark wants to know if this picture of the schoolhouse, the rest of it has been disassembled and taken away. Yeah, most of the foundations were either wood like this or stone or just sort of flat. So
yeah, and that's not uncommon. I mean, and you can do flat foundation wood platform with a canvas tent or something to that effect. That's really quick and easy to put up, take down, reuse the next camp.
Great, thanks for the question. So limited excavation, a lot of survey, just see what's out there, how are different features related to each other. And then Margaret, you want to talk about this one?
What, with which one? The next one? Yes. So yeah, and then of course public outreach, which is why we're here talking to you all. This is what we hope to be the beginning of opportunities to take this information out to the public. With the field school being at the camp location, we hope, or at the location of the site, and the students being out there for periods of time, we hope to do events in Tucson, events in the park. We'd like to, when you do online events, do presentations at the Arizona Historical Society. I'm sure we'd be glad to come and do presentations for the Grand Canyon Historical Society. Hint, hint, hint. And any other opportunity to get information out about not only the work that this field school is doing, but more about this history of the logging railroad. We have a lot of interest in railroad, and of course, as Al is spearheading the Railroad State Museum coming in here to Williams, it seems like a natural, so I wouldn't say partnership, but a natural opportunity to get out and really talk more about the larger picture of railroad history in this area. And as Al, I'm sure, can speak to, I certainly get a lot of questions, a lot of interest in the railroad history here. So any opportunities, and that's something we specifically asked of Emily, which of course she was all over, that we try to get the students involved in getting the information out and giving public presentations. So, and for those who are familiar with it, we also hope to do at least 1 or 2 sessions of the Forest Service Passport in Time program. And so I'll put a little ad about that. So for those who might be interested, that's a volunteer program. If you're interested, what they call it PIC, there's a website online to tell you about the program. But we will be looking, we do open it up, we do have volunteer sessions. So I know Emily's very interested in supporting that. And so we're hoping to, we're looking at as doing that as a future, maybe doing a mix with students and with volunteers to do some work at the site as well. So a lot of good opportunity there.
Yeah, one thing we're excited about is that we got a grant through Arizona Humanities to build the public component. So we're gonna have like a little visitor center, make some brochures. We're also hoping to contact, Grand Canyon Historical Society to organize planned tours, so you can sign up and come and visit the site and see what we're doing and what kind of artifacts and stuff we're finding. So we're anticipating a lot of planned, but then also if people just end up stopping by the site, we're gonna give some tours there too, just to educate the public on why archaeology is important. One of the reasons we chose the site is because it is so on the surface. We have a lot of evidence of looting. It's right behind the Grand Canyon Airport, so there is some possibility for expansion there. No, it is not going to be a permanent visitor center. It's going to be like a table and a canopy with a. So yeah,
I could see in the future maybe working with the town of Tucson and maybe doing some stuff, some displays or things in town. That's another opportunity. So definitely some things that can be done in the future.
Yeah, so working with the public is an integral part and has been part of this project planning since the beginning, and really something that we're excited about. So just a little brief breakdown of what we hope to learn out of the project. One thing we want to learn is what is the relationship between the different features. So where is the industrial stuff? Is it closer to the railroad line versus the buildings? What's the relationship between the siding and the camp? What's going on down the logging spur? We also want to know more about the laborers. What exactly is the nature of this business relationship between the two companies? How did that work on the ground? And then what is the relationship between the two different groups, laborers? We know the children are going to school there, but do we see any other kinds of social interaction going on between the two sets of workers? And then we just want to know what life was like. This is a company town, so supplies are sort of limited to what the company will provide and how much you're willing to drive down into Williams to get other things. It's also the Great Depression, which is hitting Arizona really hard. And it's during Prohibition. So this might not be the happiest time, but they're making more money than other workers in the area. So in an isolated company town during the Great Depression and Prohibition, what is just sort of life generally like? And how can we see that displayed sort of across the camp, but then also at these individual features? What is life like for the superintendent versus just sort of the single laborer living in the company housing? Anything else to add to that, Margaret?
No, other than I think we actually have found, didn't we find some alcohol there, which is pretty interesting given the fact
a whiskey bottle.
Yeah, I found some. So obviously, during Prohibition, the question is there alcohol there? And maybe not commercially made alcohol, but we know they probably were doing stills in the forest and stuff. So I mean, that's another interesting aspect of this, because that is a unique, Prohibition is a unique period in American history. So
I mean, we're
Yeah.
also running up the fact, I mean, as we'll see, most of the trash is just sitting on the ground, and we have a lot of bottle caps and broken bottle glass, but there are very, very few whole bottles. But we have a lot of 1950s and 1960s cone top cans, which means people are going out there shooting, drinking beer, hunting, and probably picking up the whole bottle. So a lot of the evidence for things like alcohol consumption is going to be limited by what they ended up breaking while they were using it. So we do have some limitations to what we can ask just based on the nature of the site.
Yeah.
So what do we know about what we actually find at the site? We do have some preliminary survey work. We've been up there a couple times. We're going in a couple of weeks.
Yep.
Sorry. My laptop is being held up with novels right now. So one of the most prevalent things at the camp are can dumps. These are 3 separate can dumps. There's at least 10 across the site. Here are 2 more, and they all contain hundreds of cans, all kinds of cans, tobacco tins, baking powder tins, fruit tins, not the milk, condensed
Spices.
milk, fruit, yeah. Just every type and size of can you can imagine. There's like battery cans in there, and just like every kind of can you could possibly imagine. Wash tubs. Just I'm gonna get tetanus just by looking at the site. Oh, 1933. Thanks, Karen. Yeah, so we do have some overlap when Prohibition ended, but thankfully a lot of bottles can be dated so we can see what's going on there. Like, did they immediately just start drinking all the alcohol once it was available, or is that something the company allowed? So that'd be interesting question about the transition there. So again, just sitting on the surface. So if there were whole bottles in here, they're probably long gone, but we're going to do some sort of sampling and counting. We are in no way bringing any of these cans home with us. We are using a strategy of leave where you find it and not collecting anything. So we'll do a lot of in the field analysis. So if you come up and visit for a tour, you'll get to look at some of the lab work that we're doing. But yeah, there's at least, I think, 10 can dumps of this size at the site, and smaller ones all throughout. So they clearly have designated areas. This is where you put your trash. But it'll be interesting to see if they're associated with specific foundations or features.
Yeah, and one thing I would add that one of the things that the large amount of cans are telling us is that, depending on the types of cans, especially large industrial cans, would tell us a lot about whether they're cooking food for their workers versus the individual families who are cooking their own. So that those cans will tell us that. You can buy peaches in large industrial cans, which a lot of the companies did do if they had some sort of commissary type situation. They're buying in bulk, and so you're going to see that in the cans, as well as women with wives who are coming in cooking for their individual families. Are they providing? Are they cooking for the individual families, or are they relying on the commissaries, for instance? So those are something that'll tell us a lot about how people were operating within the camp. So yeah, it's a lot of trash and it's a lot of cans, but they actually can tell you a lot about the people and who they were using it. And then it's in where's the next slide? You've got the great ceramics.
There's prettier things on the next slide. But
Yeah.
I mean, with the cans, we know there's also a dining car, so maybe it was camped at a specific place when it was in town, and so that's its trash. Or do we see different kinds of foods out at the logging spurs because they're making their lunch there instead of bringing it with them?
And Atchison, Topeka actually did dump their trash on the side of the railroad. There are farther down towards Valley, there are large dumps where Atchison, Topeka was dumping the food wastes from their commissary cars out along the rail line. But much of what's in there are their typical Atchison, Topeka ceramics, the California poppy, the stuff that has their logo on it. That's very attached to Atchison, Topeka and their electric cars. So you should be able to determine whether it's part of the Atchison, Topeka versus an industrial.
Yeah, so within the can dumps and sort of elsewhere, we also have a lot of other evidence of daily life, ceramics, for example, and a lot of the ceramics you can see are highly decorated. So we're not just getting plain, I need a plate to eat something off of, give me something the cheapest that there is, but you've got floral prints. Oh, no, I went too far. This weird tiger stripe thing that I'm not quite sure what it is yet. There's this piece of a doll, part of a doll's porcelain doll neck. You can see 1894, so someone held on to that for a while. Here's the whiskey that we found. Did it not go?
No, it's there.
Frozen. Okay.
Well,
And this bottle basically.
I was gonna say, in that, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and that tells us again, that goes back into who was at this camp, because a bunch of worker bees guys who are coming in and working lumber all day, they're not going to bring up fancy ceramic ware, not likely. So that really tells us a lot about the fact that you probably have women and families here who are basically making their home.
And it's likely not what the company store would be selling either.
Mm-hmm.
We can also see connections across the area. This bottle, for example, says Flagstaff on it. So this sort of larger connection across northern Arizona is existing, not just to Williams, but beyond that. Sadly, we only have the base of this. I don't know what was in the bottle. There's also a lot of industrial stuff. So running through the middle of the camp is the railway. So here's the railroad grade. And you can see some of the ties are still in there. And all around that are giant drums of oil, fire bricks.
Slides are taking a while. Give it a minute. Yep. Not quite there yet. Not yet. Yeah, I think it's just a moment. Be patient, folks. There it is.
So here's the railroad grade. You can see the ties are still in it, nice flat level area. This is where the modern road is down here, and then about half the camp is up here. You also see a lot of charcoal, so they may have been making charcoal as well. Fire bricks, like I said, big drums of like oil. So there does sort of appear to be an industrial center of the town, where all the labor work that needed to happen in town was happening. So again, we're going to follow this out, see how far we can follow these spurs out away. And finally, my favorite artifact, is it going?
Not yet. It's taking a minute.
It's going to be no one else's favorite artifact.
We're weird that way. It's taking a moment. There we go.
The mystery jar. This is like the only whole jar in any of the dumps, and it's probably because it's full of a mystery liquid of questionable color and probably smell. I kind of want to do a residue analysis to see what's in it, but I'm pretty sure it might kill me if I smelled it, because it's been sitting in the sun in the middle of a can dump for so long. But that is the kind of analysis we might be able to do if we do find more intact kinds of things. And Margaret, you think it's mayonnaise, right? Old mayonnaise?
I think it's Hellman's mayonnaise. It looks like a Hellman's mayonnaise jar, but that's just me. I'm seeing there's a question in here. Has there been any effort made to talk with relatives of people who work there at the camps, where the tribe workers from local tribes? That is something that will be part of this process, actually, wouldn't it, Emily?
Al talked to some of the people who had lived and worked there. There's also a couple of oral histories of Grand Canyon Railway workers that's available through the Northern Arizona University Klein Library collection of Colorado Plateau histories that I need to listen to. And some of those I think are from Apex. You can search them, and Apex comes up a couple times. I just haven't had time to listen to those yet. So there are some oral traditions. I haven't heard of anyone, and Al, maybe you can correct me on this, who has talked to Native American or Mexican connections.
And some of There are descendants of some of the Mexican workers on the railroad who still live in Williams. That much I do know, and Al may correct me here, but I know that quite a few of the Native Americans who worked on the Topeka were from the Laguna tribe. In fact, my family knew some folks who lived in Barstow who were Laguna, and they were railroad workers. So I think that some of those Native American workers were people whose were associated or close to the railroad, there who's physically land, you know, because Laguna literally goes right through, I believe, or right next to the Laguna Reservation. I mean, it's possible that some of the local tribes had workers on those, but I don't know. Al, can you speak to that?
Did he make it in?
He's been having trouble getting in and getting out, so he's off right now.
Okay.
Yeah, one
Yeah,
of the things
Go ahead.
one of the things I'm still looking into finding is the census, which would have been from 1940. There's a copy of it. ASU is it? Which one's in Tucson? I always forget.
Arizona State User. Yeah, it was in Tucson. Well,
Yeah,
the
they have the census on microfilm, so I'm going to go down and see if Apex is or the siting is listed as a individual thing, and then we could get some names and try to trace them out that way. But that's just again something that the libraries have been closed.
The 1940 census is now out on Ancestry.com, by the way. Just came out. But I do know that the 1910 census.
Sorry, the 1930 census.
1930 census is out, and then we also, for the railroad construction itself, which would actually help speak to who is on the who are the workers on the railroad. They did, especially when they actually built that railroad in 1900. The census came through, so they actually have a list of the workers who were part of that construction. Because they actually walked through and enumerated the camps, the construction camps themselves. So that might help inform it as well. But yeah, the 40 census just came out on Ancestry.com.
Cool.
Any other questions?
Yeah, that's what we had.
Yeah,
University of Arizona.
I've got
Go
some
ahead.
questions, and I'm gonna ask a couple questions, and I encourage everybody to, if you have a question, unmute yourself, and jump in. I was very curious on a couple things. Where did they get their water from? Did that come in up by rail?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it did. And it would have come out, it would have come out of Chino Valley. So, you know, the Rio, I'm blanking on the name of the spring that, that they used to haul water. In fact, that was one of the main uses of the railroad. They hauled water out of Chino Valley to bring water up for not only logging operations, but they also hauled water up for all the ranching operations and anybody else who lived up there. So the railroad was key for hauling water up for all everything along that rail line all the way to the park. So yeah, they would have most likely gotten their water via the railroad, because it's just right. Even today, water, as you all probably know, water in Tucson is coming out of the park.
Right.
So water would have been an issue. It would have had to come up by the railroad.
Del Rio.
Yeah, that's it, Del Rio.
Thinking about
Richard,
water.
Sorry, Richard has a question in the comment. Were you going to start a new question, Brian?
Sure.
Oh, okay. Well, let me get Richard's first so we can just sort of alternate here. Richard wants to know, was the track removed at the same time the town was dismantled? Yeah, they stayed behind. So they moved everything out, school shut down, and then a couple laborers stayed behind and pulled up all the tracks and stuff. And they were also like, once they finished a spur, they would take it apart and like use those ties again while they could. But it wasn't a super solid railway. It wasn't as fancily built as the Grand Canyon Railway, because those were definitely built to be temporary. So as they were packing up the town, people stayed behind. Some laborers stayed behind and packed up what they could, what was still good.
And let me add a lot of that stuff. I mean, there were abandoned rail cars, et cetera, on the forest at one time, but I think a lot of that, and Terry might be able to speak to this better than I am, a lot of that got cut up and recycled as part of the war effort by World War II. So a lot of that got recycled and reused.
Connie's got a
Connie?
question.
Yes, you said about the school that the white kids were educated upstairs and the minority kids were downstairs. But then when you showed the picture, it
Williams,
looked like pardon me?
in Williams.
Oh, in Williams. Sorry, I misunderstood. Okay.
No,
But
it's
so
okay.
they're in Apex, whoever was there all got educated together.
It was just
Okay.
a little
Thanks.
one-room schoolhouse. I mean, no
Yeah.
one was gonna stay long enough to go to high school or anything there.
Yeah, because the state of Arizona segregation of school systems was the law of the land from starting in 1909 up to 1953. So
Mhm.
started out with Black kids, but it extended it to Mexican kids as well. It was
Mhm.
only the elementary schools. I believe by high school they no longer were segregated. And Arizona desegregated a year before Brown versus Education. So Arizona desegregated in 53 and Brown versus Education
Yeah.
in 54.
Okay. Thanks.
But yeah, she's right. In small schools like that, where they couldn't, theoretically, they're supposed to put up some sort of barrier. They didn't bother. Why? When you only have, 10 kids. But in larger schools, like you have what is now the Murdoch Center, which was one of 2 Black schools in Flagstaff because there was a larger Black population there. Do we answer that?
So I've got a question. You mentioned there was there were lumberjack jobs out in the field, living remotely, and there were jobs at the mill in Flagstaff. And it sounded like there was a lot of segregation going on right there. Was there a price difference in what you would make as a day laborer in Flagstaff versus what you would make as a lumberjack out in the field?
I would imagine so. There was also a mill and box plant, you said, in Williams.
Yeah, so the Saginaw Manistee Mill, the original one that fueled this, that supported this operation, was in Williams.
Okay.
But there is a great photo. There's a panoramic photo. It's actually sitting in the Williams Library of all the employees of what they call the Saginaw Manistee Lumber and Box Company. And you can see it right there. There's about, I don't know, maybe roughly 40, 45 people standing there. It is this panorama of all these workers, and you can absolutely see it. Almost all of them are Mexican, with a few people who are better dressed, who are clearly management.
Okay.
And Saginaw Manistee made a habit of not hiring Black people at all, although some of the other mills did. Like Flagstaff, the mills did. And of course, by that point, the Katy Company had already started operations at McNary in 1922. So there was a movement of Black lumber workers coming out of the South at that time. Saginaw Manistee didn't hire them.
Okay.
And they made a point of that. And their management made comments around that in the Williams newspaper. But they did hire a lot of Mexican labor.
I have a question. My aunt taught in the McNary schools, in the lumber camps. And, I know that she had a lot of Black students because she spoke of that. But do you know whether those were those schools unsegregated? The flag was still segregated at that point. But what about the McNary camp? Do you know?
Yeah, it was segregated. The housing was segregated, McNary.
Thank you.
Yeah. So they set up separate housing for their Black employees as their white employees. In fact, there's photos that show it. So I presume that the school system, they would actually, and that was the law of the land. They had to. And there was quite a few. They brought in 500 workers with them when they set up in 1922 out of Louisiana, I believe. So yeah, I believe they would have. And is your aunt still alive? Is she still around?
No, she's passed away. But
She would have been great.
she did talk about the mixture of the students, though,
Yeah.
and then but I was never clear about
Yeah,
that.
apparently what they would do, they didn't have enough room for a separate school. They were theoretically supposed to either teach them in separate rooms, which is what Williams did, or put up some sort of barrier that when the officials came around, they had this barrier to show that they were separated. Well, you know, as soon as the officials left, the barrier came down, I suspect, because I'm sure it was a real problem for them trying to manage their students. But yeah, it was the law of the land at that time.
Yeah, and then, you know, that same aunt and my dad, they went to a Catholic school in Flag, to St. Anthony's, and it was integrated. I mean, I'm not sure not for Black students, but there were Hispanic students, I know.
Yeah.
And that was kind of interesting too, because you see the pictures of like my dad's little basketball team, and they were, you know, very diverse crew, you know. So that was interesting. But because they were parochial school, I guess they were, you know, had an exemption there.
Yeah, they probably weren't subject to that because it was state law.
Yeah.
I had another question for Margaret and Emily. When you get your actual clearance to get out in the field and start working there, would you please reach out to the Grand Canyon Historical Society and let us know, because it would be great to do tours out there on a once a week or once a month basis, whatever you prefer, to just let people know that this is happening, time, date. Please put us on your contact these people list to make that happen. That would be really fun.
Yeah, you're right up at the top.
Awesome. Well,
Oh yeah.
so long as we're on the list, doesn't matter where.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you guys are way high up there with the.
You're very
We'll
kind.
be up there for 4 weeks with students through June.
Okay.
And still working on the schedule, but yeah, we'll be there very end of May through the end of June working. So
That sounds great.
we'll probably be in touch in probably March, April to start setting up planned tours.
Excellent. Excellent. Those are all the questions I've got. Anybody else have any more questions? I just saw that a couple people joined, and we've been really trying with these virtual outings to let people know that these start at 6 o'clock Pacific Daylight Time, which is Flagstaff's time. So if you just joined us from Cottonwood or Prescott, I am really sorry because you just missed this incredible presentation. The cool thing about this is we have recorded this, so this will be up on the Grand Canyon Historical Society website, so you can watch it there. But again, we will keep trying to get that message out there. That
add for you historic railroad enthusiasts and want a little more information about the Grand Canyon Railroad. It was nominated it is on the National Register of Historic Places. And I believe a copy of that nomination, if you're interested, is probably available on the National Historic Preservation website. There now all that stuff is digital, and I believe a copy of this is available there. If not, I would strongly recommend that you seek out Al Richmond's book. In fact, I think he just republished it, and they have it there at the Williams Visitor Center. And I'm not sure, do they have it in the must have in the park somewhere?
I don't know.
Anyway, but yeah, and I'm sorry Al's not here but I'll be happy to busk his book for him. But he has a whole section dedicated just to this site. So I would strongly recommend, if you have an interest in coming and being a tour, grab his book and do a little research. There's a lot of information out there on the Grand Canyon Railroad itself, the logging history here, and then Al's book on the Grand Canyon Railroad. And by the way, he also did the nomination. So the railroad itself is also listed on the National Register, and I believe the nomination, in fact, I know the nomination is there because that's where I went to go get it. So look for those. If you want more information, look in those locations for more information about the site and about these railroads.
Would Rich Turner put up a real good point? If you would be willing, because I know you've got a lot to do. It'd be great to do an article about this for the Old Pioneer, for the magazine of the society. If you could put something together on that would be. We'd really like to run that.
What do you think, Emily?
I mean, I've got all my grant proposals and stuff written up. I could easily tailor it to a more public audience.
Great.
Yeah, add a couple of good photos in there. Should be easy.
Make it
Our
easy on
November
yourself.
will be a lot clearer than this month in October.
That would be great. Well, with that, maybe we ought to think about wrapping things up. I did want to mention that even though it says over here that I'm supposed to be Brian Blue, Brian's tied up in the corner. My name is Tom Martin, and I'm hosting this program tonight. So those of you that are wondering, it's like, you don't look like Brian. What's going on over there?
Well, I apologize. I was calling you Brian all evening.
I don't mind being
No,
called
me
Brian. I've
too.
been called worse.
Sorry,
I know
Tom.
Brian Blue.
Gee whiz.
I'm sorry, Tom.
And next month, we typically do these outings, virtual outings, on the second Tuesday at 6 o'clock Flagstaff time. Because of the Colorado Basin History Symposium, next month, it's going to be at 5 o'clock. Sorry, not 5 o'clock. It's going to be at 6 o'clock the first Tuesday. And that's going to be Lori Alger talking about her dad, Jim Alger, who worked for over 40 years for Walt Disney and was on the Colorado River in Grand Canyon in 1958. And again in 1958 and 1959. Working on some filming for Walt Disney. So she's going to talk about that. And that's coming up again, not the second Tuesday, but the first Tuesday at 6 o'clock. So if we've confused you and you've arrived just now, we're really going to confuse you next month.
But Tom, this is Paul, and we got here late because we had another commitment, but thank you for recording it, and we'll look tomorrow to see it on the recording.
I'll do that. I'll get it up tonight, Paul. That'd be great.
Good. Thanks a lot, Tom.
Hey, thank you. And remember, this is a nonprofit organization which relies on your donations and your membership, and we're pitifully grateful to have you. Thank you so much for coming out tonight, one and all of you. And with that, I think we will bid you all good evening. And thank you again to Margaret Hangan and Emily Dale for your willingness to present to us tonight. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
All right. Y'all have a good evening. Good night.
Bye, Tom.